For most of history, war was sabache yet affordable, not ethically affordable. Operationally affordable. Fighters were drawn from lives already lived. Weapons were extensions of everyday labor. Campaigns followed seasons, distance, and empty stomachs. Rulers did not require ledgers to wage conflict. They required allegiance, animals, and patience. Then a single technology altered the equation. Gunpowder did not merely amplify destruction. It transformed warfare into an expense. And once warfare became an expense, it ceased to measure valor and began to measure solvency. Welcome to a history where power is priced, authority is financed, and conflict reveals systems beneath courage. And nothing here remains simple or accidental. Before gunpowder, authority was dispersed. Power rested in layers of obligation rather than institutions. Medieval warfare relied on social structure, not administration. Lords raised forces from their own lands. Vassals answered calls bound by custom. Armies appeared when required and vanished when necessity passed. Most fighters were not professionals. They were farmers, craftsmen, and retainers whose primary lives existed outside battle. When campaigns ended, they returned home. War paused because life demanded it. Weapons reflected this economy. Swords, spears, shields, and bows were durable possessions, not consumables. Armor was inherited, repaired, and reused across generations. Logistics were simple because needs were limited. Food constrained distance. Seasons constrained time. Geography enforced boundaries no ruler could ignore. Conflict rarely exceeded what local resources could sustain. No permanent apparatus existed to push beyond those limits. This structure imposed restraint without planning it. Rulers could threaten, raid, or siege, but escalation carried immediate social costs. Overreach dissolved loyalty. Armies melted away as fields demanded labor and winter approached. Authority weakened when obligations were abused. The system enforced balance through necessity rather than policy. Gunpowder entered this world quietly. Early cannons were crude, inconsistent, and dangerous to operate. Early firearms lacked accuracy and reliability. To established elites, they appeared inferior to traditional arms refined over centuries. They seemed loud, inefficient, and inelegant. Many dismissed them as novelties rather than revolutions. That judgment missed the true impact. Gunpowder did not matter because it killed differently. It mattered because it changed what killing required. Cannons transformed sieges from tests of patience into contests of material. Walls that once symbolized security became liabilities. Stone fortifications collapsed under sustained fire. Defense demanded redesign. Bastions grew lower and thicker. Angles replaced height. Construction became technical rather than symbolic. These changes carried cost. Engineers replaced masons. Calculations replaced tradition. Stone, timber, iron, and labor multiplied. Fortresses were no longer local projects. They were state investments. Time stretched. Budgets expanded. Defense became continuous rather than episodic. Firearms altered armies in the same way. Training a knight demanded years of wealth and social conditioning. Training a musketeer demanded less time, but more infrastructure. Weapons had to be produced uniformly. Powder had to be refined, transported, and stored. Ammunition had to be replenished constantly. Maintenance never ended. What soldiers carried mattered less than what followed them. War ceased to be local. It became logistical. Victory depended on delivery rather than valor. Supply lines replaced bravery as the decisive factor. Battles reflected organizational capacity more than individual skill. Engagements were won by endurance, not courage. Standing armies emerged from this shift. Feudal levies proved incompatible with permanent readiness. States required forces that existed regardless of harvest cycles or local obligations. Soldiers became professionals whose livelihoods depended on continuous pay. Armies no longer disbanded after campaigns. They drilled, waited, and consumed resources even in peace. This persistence altered power. Local lords could not sustain artillery or permanent forces. Small polities lacked the revenue to modernize defenses. Fragmented authority failed under sustained cost. Centralization followed necessity rather than ideology. Only governments capable of predictable extraction survived. Gunpowder did not simply overcome castles. It undermined decentralization itself. Authority consolidated where money could be gathered reliably. Once rulers recognized that warfare demanded constant funding, a new question dominated strategy: revenue. Temporary levies no longer sufficed. Emergency taxation failed against permanent expense. States normalized collection. What had been exceptional became routine. Negotiated contributions became assumed obligations. Subjects were transformed from participants into taxpayers. Loyalty alone no longer sustained power. Even this proved insufficient. Gunpowder wars expanded in scale and duration. Cannons, fortifications, fleets, and wages exceeded what taxation could raise in real time. Governments turned outward for funding. Borrowing shifted from desperation to design. Debt became policy. This marked a structural transformation. Credit extended the battlefield beyond manpower. A ruler with access to lenders could continue long after public patience expired. War detached from immediate consent. Conflict persisted because financing allowed it to persist. This was not an accident. It was the foundation of the modern state. Once war could be financed beyond immediate resources, its character changed permanently. Conflict no longer ended when enthusiasm faded or fields demanded labor. It ended only when funding collapsed. Costs could be postponed, distributed, and concealed. Losses no longer required resolution. They required refinancing. This shift marked the point where war escaped social limits and entered systemic management. Permanent armies required permanent solutions. Taxes alone could not meet continuous demand without provoking resistance. Excessive extraction risked unrest. Insufficient spending risked defeat. Governments faced a dilemma with no clean resolution. They could not pay for modern war openly without destabilizing the societies they ruled, so they altered how payment was experienced. Inflation provided that mechanism. It was not new, but its role was transformed. Earlier rulers debased coinage during crises, clipping silver, or reducing purity to survive emergencies. These measures were obvious and dangerous. Trust evaporated quickly. Soldiers rejected pay. Markets stalled. Authority collapsed when manipulation became visible. Gunpowder warfare changed the environment in which inflation operated. When military spending became permanent, states required a method to diffuse cost gradually. Inflation achieved this quietly. Instead of demanding more from citizens directly, governments reduced what money represented indirectly. Value was extracted without confrontation. Burden shifted without announcement. This was a structural evil. Inflation ceased to be an emergency tool and became a management strategy. Before gunpowder, it addressed events. After gunpowder, it stabilized systems. The distinction mattered. Cannons demanded replacement. Powder degraded. Weapons wore down. Fortifications required upkeep, even without attack. Armies consumed resources every day they existed. Expense accumulated regardless of combat. Debt bridged the gap between revenue and necessity. But debt introduced another problem: repayment. Inflation resolved this as well. Rising prices reduced the real weight of obligations incurred during earlier conflicts. Creditors received nominal repayment while absorbing real loss. Defaults were avoided. Political backlash diminished. The process remained largely invisible. Through this mechanism, war became socially tolerable. Not cheap, but survivable. Inflation stabilized regimes without dramatic rupture. It eroded value steadily rather than destroying it suddenly. Hyperinflation still threatened collapse, but moderate inflation became acceptable each buhat time. It preserved continuity. It allowed systems to function under strain. Once established, this logic expanded beyond warfare. Military budgets normalized. Debt rolled forward indefinitely. Inflation shifted from anomaly to expectation. Financial institutions evolved to manage pressure rather than eliminate it. Central authorities gained influence because coordination became essential. Stability required control. This was the deeper legacy of the gunpowder economy. Violence no longer required immediate approval. It required liquidity. Resistance could be exhausted rather than persuaded. Sacrifice could be generalized instead of targeted. War embedded itself within financial systems rather than standing apart from them. Society adjusted accordingly. Those who never fought still paid. Savings lost purchasing power quietly. Wages trailed prices. Obligations outlived the rulers who incurred them. Generations inherited costs, detached from memory. The connection between battlefield and household weakened, not because war diminished, but because its expense dissolved into daily life. This diffusion produced durability. Modern states appear resilient because pressure is spread rather than concentrated. Conflict persists without visible strain. Budgets absorb violence where populations once did. Today, warfare is constrained less by manpower than by financing. Aircraft carriers, satellites, cyber infrastructure, and logistics networks represent financial endurance as much as military capability. The decisive question remains unchanged, not who fights best, but who can afford persistence. Restraint rarely emerges from morality alone. It emerges from cost. When cost is deferred, absorbed, or disguised, restraint erodes. War becomes structural rather than exceptional. It resides within systems designed to sustain it. This does not render conflict inevitable. It clarifies its conditions. As long as financial mechanisms exist to carry its burden, war remains viable. Discussions of debt, inflation, and public finance are therefore inseparable from discussions of power. These are not abstractions. They are instruments that allow force to operate without immediate collapse. Gunpowder revealed a truth rulers could not ignore. Endurance depends on finance. Authority follows solvency. Power belongs not merely to those who command armies, but to those who can fund them indefinitely. Gunpowder did not simply alter warfare. It redefined what authority needed to survive. The point is not that technology is evil or finance is immoral. It is that systems adapt to the burdens they must carry. When those burdens grow large enough, they reshape everything upstream: institutions, currency, and the lives structured around them. History never repeats itself, yet it echoes with uncomfortable precision. When innovation raises the cost of power, money intervenes to sustain it. And once that mechanism forms, it is rarely reversed. If this shifted how you see power, subscribe. History explains more than headlines ever will today alone.